Have you ever woken up to the smell of your own life going up in smoke? I'm not talking about burning dinner or leaving a candle on too long. I mean the whole works, your roof, your old chair, the books you kept saying you'd read, even the pillowcase that still carries a trace of your wife's perfume. Have you ever stood in your yard at 3 a.m. in your pajamas, feeling the dew soak your feet while you watch flames devour what used to be your bedroom? And deep down you just know this isn't a freak accident, no matter what the fire chief might say. If you've been through anything like that, first off, I hope you're okay. If you've never had a neighbor from hell, the type that makes you clench your jaw just seeing their porch light flick on, you should count yourself lucky, or maybe share your story down below, because I promise you, you're in good company. Name's Alistair Williams, and before all this, I'd spent 3 decades as a lawyer and the last 10 as a federal judge. You'd think I'd be immune to human nonsense by now, right? I thought so too. But nothing in the courtroom prepares you for standing there as a victim watching your own house burn, convinced you know exactly who struck the match. It wasn't just a Tuesday night that turned into a nightmare. It was the moment everything I believed about justice and community got put to the ultimate test. Sarah, my wife, and I bought our place on Briarwood Lane a few years back, a solid old brick house tucked under the shade of some ancient oaks, not in one of those matchy-matchy subdivisions with rules about what color your curtains can be. And crucially, not part of the Chestnut Ridge Estates, HOA, the very one run by Beverly Ann Albright Queen Bee, an iron-fisted ruler of that particular little empire. Standing on the curb as the firemen did their best, I looked over and sure enough, there she was, Beverly Ann. Watching with this look that wasn't quite concern, more like satisfaction. Proprietary even, like she was overseeing an eyesore finally being erased. I'm a patient man, or so I thought. My wife says I have a judicial stare, a look that could curdle milk, or at the very least make folks second-guess themselves. I could feel it on my face that morning, aimed straight at Beverly Ann as she chatted up the neighbors, no doubt offering her own special version of events. She'd been a thorn in our side from day one, the only house on the block that didn't bow to her HOA's endless list of rules. She'd drop by always with a little dig or a neatly penned note about our grass height or the festive but not ostentatious wreath Sarah put up at Christmas. Every note signed in perfect cursive for a better Chestnut Ridge. I kept every single one in a folder, partly from habit, partly because, well, I had a feeling I'd need them. That night after the flames died down, and Sarah and I were left to pick over the wet ashes, I realized something. Beverly Ann hated the fact that we didn't fit her vision, that we were independent. That we were in her eyes an eyesore, a black family in an old house not subject to her rules. And now, all our careful efforts to stay out of her line of fire had literally gone up in smoke. Of course, proving arson isn't easy, especially when you're up against the assumption that old houses just burn. The fire marshal, the insurance adjuster, the detective, they all asked the right questions, but I could see in their faces they were leaning toward accident unless something obvious changed their minds. I did my part, showed them the Albright files, told them about the veiled threats, like the time Beverly Ann told me right to my face that fire hazards can bring down the value for everyone. At the time, I'd brushed it off as her usual bluster. Standing in the ruins of my living room, those words took on a much darker shade. Detective Corbin listened politely, said he'd look into it, but warned me. Judge, it's a leap from nasty notes to arson. I understood that, but I also understood the kind of person who can't stand to be defied. Beverly Ann wasn't just petty. She had the kind of intensity that makes you lock your doors at night. And when people like that lose control, they can do unpredictable things. Sarah, for her part, was grieving, but she was also furious. That woman never looked at us like neighbors, she said one night, not just because we wouldn't join her club. She couldn't stand that we existed here at all. And she was right. You could see it in Beverly Ann's eyes. There was always this undercurrent, something that said, "You don't belong here," no matter how neighborly her words sounded. The more I thought about it, the more I realized we needed to fight back, not with threats, but with facts. I hired a private investigator, Frank Donovan, an ex-cop who'd seen it all, and had the patience to match mine. He started digging quietly, methodically into Beverly Ann's routines, her finances, her connections. What he found wasn't a smoking gun, at least not at first, but it was enough to paint a picture. Angry contractors stiffed for payment. Landscapers badmouthed for trimming a rose bush half an inch too short. Residents strong-armed into overpriced upgrades by companies linked to Beverly's own family. Always a pattern punishment for defiance. One little detail stuck out: a cash purchase of paint thinner and rags at a hardware store across town just days before the fire. Paid cash, no loyalty card, no name, but the clerk remembered her, that snooty lady from Chestnut Ridge, asking about what would burn fastest. Not enough for an arrest, but enough to know my gut wasn't lying. But here's where things took a turn. Frank started following the money, and it got ugly fast. Shell companies funneling HOA payments to a P.O. box tied to Beverly Ann's address, contracts for neighborhood upgrades, going to her brother-in-law's business at inflated prices, kickbacks, you name it. The woman wasn't just a busybody, she was running a tidy little racket, and anyone who got in her way got steamrolled. With each new resident Frank interviewed, the story got clearer. A retired accountant named Jenkins had quit the HOA Finance Committee after being stonewalled on questions about weird payments. A widow named Mrs. Henderson had been guilted into buying an expensive vinyl fence. Guess who owned the installation company? Even the contractor she'd stiffed one of them told Frank. She said people who don't respect the rules eventually learn there are consequences. Consequences. That word kept coming up. So we built a case. Frank assembled a dossier, statements, invoices, timelines, everything tied up in a neat, damning package. But we needed to get the community on board, break the wall of silence Beverly Ann had built through fear and intimidation. Sarah suggested we hold a meeting at her sister's church, a neutral spot away from Beverly's prying eyes. We sent anonymous invitations, and on the night of about 30, residents showed up, some angry, some just tired, but all ready to hear the truth. Frank presented the evidence: shell companies' kickback, stories of harassment. Faces went from shock to anger to something like relief. Mr. Jenkins stood up and said, "It's about time someone held her accountable." One by one, others joined in, stories about fines for trivial things, threats, public shaming. When I stood up to speak, I told them who I was, not just a neighbor, but a federal judge, and what I suspected. I laid it all out, including the arson. I told them if they were willing to come forward together, we could take this to the Commonwealth's attorney. Not just for me, but for everyone who'd been bullied or cheated by Beverly Ann. And they did. 20 signed affidavits, a mountain of evidence, and a unified front. The attorney's office moved fast, subpoenas, seized records, the works. The arson was still a long shot, but the financial crimes, those stuck. The day Beverly Ann was served, right in the middle of an HOA meeting, her empire crumbled. She was charged with fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, her brother-in-law too. In court, her expensive lawyer tried to paint her as a victim of a witch hunt, but the paper trail didn't lie. The jury found her guilty, and the judge gave her 5 years and ordered restitution to the HOA. Did I get my house back? No, not the old one. But Sarah and I rebuilt brick by brick. We moved back in this time with the neighborhood behind us and a new HOA board run by actual grown-ups. The rules got fairer, the air got lighter. Every now and then I catch myself missing the creak of the old stairs, but then I look at Sarah, at the sun on the new porch, and I realize we won. Not with fire and fury, but with truth, patience, and a little bit of legal muscle. So tell me, have you ever stood up to a bully, a local tyrant, someone who thought they were untouchable? Did you win? Lose, find justice, somewhere in between? Drop your story down below, because folks like us, we need to know we're not alone. Sometimes justice takes time. But when it finally lands, there's no sound sweeter than the quiet click of the scales balancing out. And that, my friends, is the true music of a neighborhood finally set free.